Welcome, listeners, to Future Secured. Today, from the US Marine Corps to US CERT, Koch Industries, and now Team Cymru, Will Baxter has spent 2 decades on the front line of cyber defence. He's worked across government, military, and global enterprise in roles ranging from network security analyst, CIO, CTO, and now he is Field CISO for Team Cymru. So Will helps organisations operationalise threat intelligence so they can move beyond dashboards and PDFs to actually make actionable moves to reduce risk. And so today we're going to dive into Will's journey through defence and industry, the intel gaps too many orgs ignore, and the real story behind ransomware resilience and how threat teams can build influence inside the business. So thank you, Will, for joining us. Thank you, Jason, as always, my co-host, for joining us. And I'll go over to Jason for the first question.
Now, this is great because we've got Will. We tried to record this earlier and we had a really bad connection when he was over in Washington. And now we've got him, as you can see by the background, in Sydney, Australia. So it's good to have you with us, mate. And we had a great day Monday and a great evening at Love Fish. So we did, just for the listeners, and we'll share what we can, but we got a really good insight from a lot of partners and from the team, just on current threats, and it was really good because we basically covered everything across the globe. And just breaking it down, we'll get you to introduce yourself and give a bit of background in a sec. But just one of the things that never ceases to surprise me, I guess, now is that still the basics are working, right? It's not that complicated. The attackers are still using 101 stuff to actually get in, right? But before we jump in that's a bit of a teaser, a bit of a precursor. Give us your background, how you ended up where you are today. Let's go in whatever chronicle order you'd like to give us your background and how you ended up where you are today, mate.
Yeah, certainly. As you mentioned, I sort of cut my teeth in the Marine Corps, served as a navigator on C-130s, sort of a wild jaunt in a completely different industry altogether there. But moved into the embassy duty for a while. I spent a year in the embassy in Damascus, Syria, sort of cut my teeth there on the security front, and was fortunate enough as I got out of the Marine Corps there in Quantico, had some great relationships and got right into US CERT. Spent about 3 to 4 years at US CERT, Computer Emergency Readiness Team, kind of the precursor to CISA, and spent 3 or 4 years there doing everything from senior watch officer to tier 1, 2, and 3 levels of analysis, tracking nation state threat actors, and really getting to see what a national level CERT organization could do. From there, was really ready to do more analysis and get a kind of understand what it was like to protect an organization. I hadn't really done that. I'd been more at the national level CERT. And so I went over to DoDIG, the military organization, and built out their internal security capabilities using Bro IDS. This is 2008 timeframe, and really started getting my hands deep on detection engineering, writing protocol analyzers for Bro. And from there, was ready to kind of leave the government military space after about 10 years. Moved out into to Koch Industries, as you had mentioned, the evil Koch brothers, as they were coined at the time. This was during the Occupy Wall Street kind of era. So everybody was after millionaires and billionaires, although that hadn't really changed all that much these days. And so got out there into private industry, helped them build out their security operations center, CTI program, incident response capabilities, deployed Bro globally for visibility, and was kind of played a key role in building those capabilities, those monitoring capabilities, getting visibility of the organizational footprint and telemetry, and then helped defend against, at the time, it was Anonymous, if you all have heard of Anonymous and some of the threat actors there. And it was really a difficult transition for me coming out of the government, where we had been, almost exclusively focused on nation state threats. And I get out the Koch and they said, yeah, we don't care about China. We don't care about these sophisticated threat actors. We care about Anonymous. And so it took me a while to kind of adjust my aperture. So why do you care about these anonymous, characters in their basement? But it turned out to be something that obviously impacted their brand. They were DDoSing our toilet paper website. And so I learned a little bit about, how important the brand was, and everything's driven by dollars and cents in the private sector. And so understood, start to get my feet wet with risk management, and the things again that the business really cared about. And so that was really where I started to understand the ROI of security and security investment. Um, After 3 or 4 years kind of doing SOC and IR and incident response and CTI, I moved into a security architecture role. Spent another couple of years doing a variety of different domains, from identity to security to cloud. Did a bunch of migrations and consulting work for many of the 30 different subsidiaries Coke had within its portfolio. And then eventually moved back to the DC area and took over as the CTO and CISO for the nonprofit capabilities in the Arlington, Virginia area, DC area, and did that for about 5 years before finally coming back to Team Cymru. So I've been at Team Cymru now about 3.5 years. Operate as our Field CISO. Um, I tell people, and I mentioned this the other day at the event, I literally have the best job in the world, where the whole mission in life is to fly around the world and meet with some of the best threat intelligence teams on the planet. Try to understand the challenges they're grappling with. Helping them understand how to articulate their value proposition to the organization, and figure out ways we can operationalize our threat intelligence and support their goals and their needs.
Yeah, and
So
I
that's a
think
little
from yeah, I was going
long-winded
to say,
way of.
well, no, it was good because and I think from Tom, like I've known Richard for a while, and sort of watched the business for a couple of years, but it's a very impressive list of clients and customers that you have too, and I think it probably gives an idea on where you guys are positioned in the market. And I think for the people here in Australia, you know, in this episode, we are really talking real top end, right? This is proper threat intel, and it's at
Absolutely.
the bleeding edge. Can you just give us a rundown of your clientele? I mean, we're talking Microsoft, we're talking Google, we're talking 7 of the top 10 banks, etc. Like in the market, and where you sort of come from and where you are and where you operate, and sort of ideal customer as well.
Yeah, no, Team Cymru, we've been around for 25 to 30
Mm,
years. And, I had first heard of us back in 2007 when I was at US CERT. They had actually come in to talk to the CERT. And, but aside from that, they were relatively unknown. Kind of, you
mm,
had to be within the circles to understand, to get access. And the way it kind of worked was you'd leave a government agency or government organization, law enforcement, go out in the private sector. You go to Google, Walmart, Amazon, JPMCs of the world, and say, hey, I need access to that data, and kind of have to come ask. We weren't necessarily selling. We really didn't have a commercial team until about 5 years ago.
mm,
And so it is a different world where we really only worked with the most mature organizations that kind of already understand how to take raw data and turn it into actionable intelligence.
mm.
And so that's the big journey we've been on as an organization, is democratizing that threat intelligence, and make enriching it and creating it in a way that allows organizations that may not have that sophistication and maturity, and allow them to get the benefits of that, of the intelligence.
Mm. And just yeah, I just think just Tom, sorry, it's gonna just list some of those out if you don't mind, mate, because I did
Mm.
mention sort of the Microsofts and Google, like just the levels that you're sort of talking at, and is it 7 of the top 10 banks in the US, or what are we looking at numbers wise there?
Yeah, no, it is. It's 7 of the top 10 banks in the U.S. It's your major consulting firms around the organization or around the world, Deloitte, PwCs of the world. Some of your most sophisticated security research teams. When you think CrowdStrike, we have a lot of security vendors that use our capabilities in their products. So yeah, it is the some of the most mature organizations, the world, Dragos. Um, and a variety of others that use our intelligence, and whether it's pumping it into their products and using it to sort of in an OEM model, or whether it's security research teams, or whether it's the actual end users.
Dive into the power of that RiseX event. It was really kind of amazing having that behind the scenes briefing, and
Mm.
it's frightening to see what was going out there. Some of the case studies that were shared from Canada, the nation
Yeah, the
state actor
Canadian Police
focus.
Force was really interesting, wasn't it? Like we had Mark there, who, and I think just for reference for the Australian market here too, one thing I was surprised about, because Canada and Australia are very similar in a lot
Mm.
of ways, being part of the the Commonwealth, similar head of population, similar personality types, lots of stuff. But we do complain about the disparity here of the police force, but we only have 7 different sort of police forces here. I suppose 8 if you add the AFP, I think, who are one, like one of the people you deal with here. But what is what is different over in Canada was 149 different units that they sort of have to deal with, and trying to sort of correlate that and bring that together. His presentation was one of the best ones anyway, because he kept dropping Canadian references all the way through the whole presentation.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
it kept us going. But
great
yeah,
touch.
that was interesting. Atlassian's part was really interesting. I thought as well. Again, another Australian company, but having that footprint over in the US and other parts of the world, and actually getting the feedback there and the sort of attacks that they're experiencing. We got a really good look under the hood, didn't we? Also in parts of the Middle East, and how the current conflicts are actually reflective of the type of attacks and who people are attacking as well. So, just for the people listening, mate, if you can just sort of share what you're sort of looking at, what you're seeing, and where the attacks sort of surface is sort of coming from. You talk about state actors, and there's a lot of that, but there's a lot of these sort of splinter or smaller groups that are actually doing a lot of damage, aren't they? And getting, we've seen with Qantas recently, but
Yeah.
also there are a lot of attacks with these little groups that are causing big damage at the moment.
Yeah, no, certainly. And the way we kind of, structure those events is, we're going around meeting with these teams around the globe. And the big thing that we're trying to understand is what are those PIRs and GRs, those priority intelligence requirements and general intelligence requirements that they're tasked with, collecting on. And so it's super important that we keep our ear to the ground in terms of the problem sets that they're having, because we obviously go back and we, create new tags, new enrichments, new intelligence that directly aim to help them solve that problem. So when I think about the top 3 to 5 problems right now, I'll tell you, like, number one is really account takeover.
Mm.
And that bleeds into not only fraud, right, for banks, for product security teams. You think like a Snowflake or a Salesforce or these other massive platforms, or Google, Microsoft. They've all got these accounts, and it's tied to
Mm.
identity. And so whether it's SIM swapping or sophisticated direct phishing attacks where they're getting on with a help desk and they're getting a password changed, or they phish the user directly to a link, and then they're screen capturing and able to bypass two-factor authentication. And then that leads to so many other problems, whether it's data
Mm.
exfiltration of sensitive data. Maybe it's Salesforce data, or it's a Snowflake data lake that an organization then has access to. It's kind of a range there depending on what they're able to compromise. And the threat actor's mindset, right? A lot of times this is like your scattered spider, or the calm, as they'd say. They just want to do as much damage as they can,
Mm.
and monetize it any way they can. And whether that's sell it off to a ransomware actor, or ransom them themselves. There's a variety of different, outcomes that can occur from the account takeover problem set. So
Yeah,
that's,
and
I,
those entry
I would
points are
say
interesting
that's,
too, weren't they? Will, like, a lot of them,
Mm.
they were showing Zoom, Telegram, WhatsApp. Obviously as the main ways of getting people in, and some of the ways that sort of used VC identities and other stuff with startups, especially in the crypto space, was quite interesting as well.
yeah, no, absolutely. And again, those other problems, they kind of bleed in. So when we think about the other PIRs, obviously ransomware is a
Mm.
huge problem for organizations, especially those that are less mature. A lot
Mm.
of the bigger organizations have backups, and they have mitigation techniques, and they have monitoring for lateral movement, and they're constantly looking at their own exposed footprint. Um, but when you think about supply chain, attacks where you may have 10,000 vendors in your supply chain, ecosystem, and you don't even know who all you use when it goes to, you think about a vehicle or something like that, who provides the carburetor or the parts that go into that vehicle. And if somebody down at the bottom of the supply chain, you may not even have mapped out in your process map. And from a cyber perspective, heck, the operational part of the organization may not really even understand that. How is somebody in a cyber defense role going to understand how the car is made and all the components that go into making that car? So trying to understand that visibility of a supply chain. And when you think about the threats to the supply chain, obviously ransomware is, an obvious one, where you have initial access brokers that are constantly looking to break in. We talked a little bit about Citrix Bleed,
Mm.
recent vulnerability, where folks are, and we showed some examples of where within, I think it was 13 hours, we saw hammering from disclosure to when we saw hammering and exploit attempts to overwhelm those devices, to get the memory leaks and those credentials. So you have those very, very recent or current events where you've got to stay on top of that, and a lot of times those come out right before a holiday weekend or a long weekend. They know that people will be away, or at least have a bit of their guard down and be less resourced to defend against it. From there, when you think about supply chain, you think about DPRK, the North Korean threat actors that are, getting hired or attempting to exploit. And there's a variety of different outcomes, whether it's just getting a salary from very base level all the way down to exfiltrating IP from the organization, dropping malware or setting back doors within the organization. So there's a variety of different attacks on the supply chain that folks are, grappling with right now, even if you are very mature and you have a good understanding of your footprint. But, to think about how that extends down the line, and you've got to really have a broad understanding of what's out there externally and have a comprehensive program. And a lot of folks are just lacking the resources to fight the fires that they're dealing with, much less everybody else they have to worry about. It's not a simple problem. I don't envy the CISOs around the world that are having to deal with, or the CISOs, as we'd say here down under, that are having to grapple with and try to figure out how to address that problem set.
So when Jason and I were out at RSA, we went out to Google. We had a Mandiant threat briefing, which was fantastic. But again, they talked about just the rampant rise in ransomware. And then here in Australia, we've got new cyber legislation. One of the parts of that is a mandatory reporting over 3 mil. And that's basically because the government doesn't have visibility or statistics to how bad the problem is. So, if you're kind of speaking to ASX and, those kind of larger, publicly traded companies, those leadership teams, where do you think that blind spots are today around ransomware and kind of preparing the whole network computing right down to the supply chain for that company in order to, stop this or something? It does seem like there are a whole bunch of potential fixes in the works, but people just aren't really kind of enabling them, I guess.
Yeah, well, so Marcel, our chief research scientist, showed a little bit how we're using AI within the business to advance a variety of different things, from analysis to development of products. But imagine the threat actors who are highly resourced that can use AI now to create more sophisticated lures, do more sophisticated scanning, reverse engineer, the man pages or the RFC. He was talking about how somebody had just recently used an RFC for like an IRC bot, chat app, and built that within a matter of minutes. So imagine, these initial access brokers that maybe had a barrier before of like language, understanding the language, being a first language or something like that. And now they can overcome those barriers. They can develop exploits. They can, understand when you talk about your scanning infrastructure and looking for exposed assets and, soft targets, right? Whether it's people or whether it's that edge technology, whether it's email accounts, mobile devices, there's so many soft targets out there. And that's what I think that's that's the thing that's difficult for those organizations, is understanding the broad scope that you have to have within your purview to prevent those. And so really that's not even including, hey, we're going to go out and track the threat actors, right? We're going to track the initial access brokers. We're going to use external threat intelligence like Team Cymru has to track these threat actors that are constantly, they're standing up a group, and then you hear this group went down and they got in a fight with another group, and then now they've become this other group, and so there's so many different threat actors out there. From an organizational perspective, you really just have to look at the techniques, right, and understand there's very common techniques that are used, although there's a broad set. And then, map your visibility, map your capabilities to those techniques, right? And there's a lot of frameworks out there for doing that, whether it's MITRE or the attack framework or whatnot. But understanding where you have coverage and understanding where your visibility, ends. Do we have the visibility of the endpoints? Do we have the visibility of the mobile devices? Are we constantly testing our humans to report these things to us early and often? So that you can be proactive as possible, and then not only proactive in understanding when you're being scanned, when the reconnaissance is being performed against the organization. That's one thing we talk about at Team Cymru. We have incredible visibility of scanning infrastructure out there on the internet, and we see the telemetry of who's getting scanned. Are you monitoring for those initial access broker groups, right? The AS ranges they're coming from, the ports and services for remote RMM tools, right? Crypto services and things that might be indicative of maybe even a post exploitation attack where some sort of malware is being dropped or the controller activity starts to maybe be exhibited. And so there are a lot of areas in the supply chain, or a lot of layers in the supply chain where you can potentially prevent the ultimate impact at the end of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be right at the beginning, but you ideally want to, a really quick response. A lot of times these folks will get exploited, and it may be months before the actual impact or you get ransomed. So there is I don't want to sit here and pretend that you've got all the time in the world, but it's not immediate in most cases. There are some times where the time to ransom and lock is almost immediate, but a lot of times you have some time. But you need to have all these different, as they say, a layered approach, making sure that you've got these controls at various layers, and that you're constantly checking yourselves for the gaps, right, across that layered defense model, to ensure that you're closing those gaps and that they're working. So,
yeah. I think one of the other briefings, and I'll kind of talk about the bits that were public, was it really dove into insider threats. It was, again, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Mark, who's based here in Australia, works with the AFP. But he was talking about this gentleman over in Canada and the struggles they had to actually prosecute him. But he ended up, I think, with 40 million in Bitcoin. He was actually working in federal government, and he had access. He was then charged with criminal activity, drug dealing, I believe, and then rehired. So, insider threats is also a big challenge out there. So, what do you see around that kind of space?
yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. Like, obviously, there's your typical, when we used to call the insider threat, you'd either have your disgruntled insider, right, that was actually upset and underpaid and felt undervalued, or you just had your for lack of a better term, stupid user that clicked on the link, right? So those can also be insider threats, and at the end of the day, we're humans, and mistakes will be made. I don't care how vigilant you are. Again, everything is getting more sophisticated. Use of AI makes things look more normal. And so the ease with which you can get phished, even if you do this day to day, you have a moment of, you have a lapse in judgment, you're tired. At the end of the day, you get a link on your phone, you get some sort of crafty, picture or something like that happens to have an embed in it. There's a lot of different ways for this to occur. The other thing you mentioned when you think about the insider threat, obviously employees is a big concern, but again, think about the supply chain, right? So, how many organizations these days are outsourcing their development? There's this massive push. I mean, some of my former companies, they've moved, lots of resources to India, to Vietnam, to other places for development, right? For cost. Everything's driven by the dollar. Well, there's a risk that comes with that, right? And so, you're paying somebody a low wage, they're in a foreign country, they likely don't have this, beautiful career ladder that shows them eventually making it to a CTO or CISO within the organization. So, they're being bribed. They're being targeted constantly and being offered. Obviously, if you can make a $40 million like that gentleman did in a matter of no time, how much do you think they're offering somebody? Probably several years worth of wages. It's pretty enticing to somebody that's in your supply chain and your vendor management, kind of supply line, to share some credentials, right? They don't even have to perform the activity. They can just sell some of the credentials. Nobody will ever know, and so those risks are, I would say, probably some of the most concerning insider threat when you think about the extent of that supply chain. You may have a great granular controls, privileged access management and all the best things in the world. But again, who's in that supply chain and what access do you have, down that line? I think it becomes a really complex problem.
Yeah, I think there's and this is the thing is we talk about AI and the evolution of that and how that's going to change things. But again, as we sort of speak about that, the baseline stuff still in a lot of cases is what's tripping people up.
Basic hygiene.
Um, yeah, basic hygiene is the stuff that is actually still taking people out. And you talk about offshoring and everything like that, but the risk of just 101 cybersecurity stuff seems to be the stuff that keeps tripping people up. I think sometimes we're overcomplicating it by saying these attacks are happening and that they're being, really constructed, and people are being really, they're putting a lot of thought into it. But really, it's just throw as much stuff out there as you can, spray it out there, see what comes back, get a lure, get a hit, and just go for it. But it's not that not that difficult, and they're not using any techniques which have evolved that greatly. When you sort of saw a lot of the gangs that were sort of coming out of the Middle East there, and the way they were trying to do it was very, very baseline and very basic. Probably in some ways stuff that was happening 10 or more years ago that's still working today.
Well, I tell you what's fascinating. So this is back when I was at Coke, and honestly, one of the things I kind of was, I'd say, a feather in my cap was I was on the security architecture team, and we were doing a lot of risk assessments, and helping our organizations understand what their organizational risk was. And it was really interesting because there was an organization that I was working with and for, and they were super concerned about the government getting our data, the NSA, right? And I said, I came out of that world, and I said, to be clear, yes, maybe, but I said the reality, and so I developed this model called the long tail. It was a mental model that I used with them to help them understand. So when you think about like a standard deviation, right? There's this point up here at the beginning of the chart that's kind of high, and 90% of your threat is going to be in that basic blocking and tackling. And the ROI on doing the basic blocking and tackling is very high. Now, as you get all the way down, the amount of security and investment we would have to make into the organization in order to address something that's way out on the black swan event, right? The 9/11 cyber event, where you're going to actually think you're going to prevent the NSA from, exploiting your organization. Frankly, if they want in, they'll get in. Like, that was the answer. Yep. And the amount of control and the amount of investment that it would take to prevent that very, very, very low likelihood risk. Could it happen? Absolutely. But are we realistically going to stop it even with $100 million of investment, right? And what we need to do is focus on the basic blocking and tackling, spend all of our money in basic blocking and tackling, and we'll knock out 90% of the things that are going to happen to us. And so that was a mental model, and that really came in helpful around cloud. When folks were like, oh, we have to stay on-prem, we do the security ourselves. And it was like, listen, Microsoft's been doing this a long time. Google's been doing this a long time, right? And they've, you think about the Mystic team, they've got over 6,000 analysts on the Mystic team. Their customers are great folks. Do you think we can replicate what they're doing with a help desk team and a security, 3 or 4 security analysts? Not in 25 years and $100 millions. We wouldn't ever catch them. So that was one of the key arguments, and I think it still applies, Jason, to exactly what you said. You have to look at the ROI. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business equation, it's a risk equation, and that's how you have to start thinking about quantifying the risk. Is what's going to give us the highest ROI based on the threats that we're actually facing.
Yep. Yeah.
I've seen, in the last few days that, again, Bitcoin's hit a new high. In Australia, there's been some scams around these Bitcoin ATMs that have been popped up. Again, they're human people that have been kind of convinced to put investments and retirement funds into an ATM. But again, one of the presentations towards the end was around the effort that went into an intelligence gathering exercise that potentially could be linked to an upcoming attempt to kind of knock out a whole bunch of Bitcoin. But really, the interesting part about that, it was Zoom, and it was targeting entrepreneurs and, coming from VCs and stuff like that. So with this kind of place, we know North Korea is very much making a lot of revenue from this. But what are you seeing in this kind of Bitcoin and, blockchain part of the world as far as the attention it's getting?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are organizations out there, whether it's Chain Analysis, TRM Labs. There's some folks that do crypto and know that space extremely well. I think that the knowledge around that space is isolated or siloed into, several really elite organizations that deal with it, and the rest of us have very low understanding of how that can be used, right? The rest of us are consumers, or maybe not even consumers, and we just hear a lot about it. I'm one of those ones that really didn't take advantage of the whole crypto boom, missed the whole swing. That's why I'm still working, and
Yeah,
talking to
likewise.
you guys instead of an investor in this space. But I think the understanding of the impact there and the understanding of how to secure it is isolated to some of the more sophisticated elite groups. And I don't think that a lot of that knowledge has been shared. And to your point, I mean, the same type of attacks, whether it's a SIM swapping attack, those are leading to crypto drains, right? You get an executive account, you're able to social engineer a help desk at a telco and happen to get an executive's phone, you've got their two-factor authentication if it's SMS based, two-factor, and boom, you're into their wallet, right? And so you're getting these major crypto drains. And the other thing I think Mark mentioned that's really interesting is a lot of the law enforcement organizations, they have a very narrow mission, right? Their government funds them to do X, Y, or Z, but not protect everybody that gets scammed across the world, right? And frankly, it's because they lack resources themselves. And so, a lot of these, whether it's pig butchering scams, a variety of these different scams out there, you couldn't get a government employee or a law enforcement agency to pay attention to it. And that's not a knock on them, right? They have a mission to defend the government or to defend the government interest, but not necessarily the interest of the people. And so,
Yeah.
there does need to be a lot more education around the risks and the posture that you as an individual need to take to prevent those type of scams, and how you contribute both to the problem and to the defense of yourself. Right? You can't just kind of put your head in the sand and say, "Oh, this will never happen to me. I'm not going to worry about it." Well, I'll tell you, I've got a 14-year-old son that spends way too much time on Roblox and games and modding his Minecraft and other things like that. And I told him the other day, I said, I got to get you on an unattrib network on your own dedicated line. I don't want you on the same network as me because I don't know what
Yeah.
you're doing, and I don't have time to do this at home and work.
Yeah, and that's
So
the thing is it starts at home, doesn't it, mate? That's and there was a show last night. I put a post up this morning, which I watched Insight last night, which is on SBS here in Australia. And it was actually Scammed was the episode, and it showed all these sorts of attacks, right? So it showed a person with a deposit for a house, $109,000 gone. A lady who had to look after her mum's, well, after she passed away, and she had $2 million, and she was going to put 1.6 into an ING account that got drained. There was another person, sextortion. Kid, 16-year-old boy thinks he's talking to an 18-year-old girl. She exchanges nude photo. Nude photo goes back. Turns out it's someone over in Eastern Europe extorting for $500. If you don't pay me any more money, I'll put the image out there. Image goes out there. He's embarrassed. He ends up killing himself. These sorts of stories that people just aren't seeing. Guy with crypto, puts his money in a crypto thing, run by a crypto company, $461,000 gone. So this stuff is not the stuff that we see. We see the Qantas stuff where it's a third party, it's someone in the Philippines talking about the other stuff we're doing. But it's at this grassroots and this base level where the people are actually getting done and they don't know what's happening. They're not aware of any of this sort of stuff, and it is getting that message out there. And I think we here in Australia, we need more help from the banks and from the government and all that sort of stuff. In the UK, you got 5 days to sort out something if there's an issue. The banks are just doing wet lettuce slaps over here at the moment and doing bugger all about it. We need government. We need that assistance and that help to push down the line to make sure we get better coverage across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. No, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I've got an interesting question around the tension that exists around threat intelligence. And so, at the end of the day, the briefing was Chatham House rules. There's a lot of stuff that can't be shared. The power of being able to get this information out there to more people has the potential to kind of create better impact. But in that AI presentation, it came up. I think it might have been from one of the questions that you can see threat actors getting smart and auto building companies using apps. Sorry, not companies. Auto building a program that is basically taking a CVE exploit immediately and then just going out and hunting for access through that. So how do you walk that fine line of what you can share and what you can't share? And what do you think it's going to look like in the future? Is it going to stay the same? Most of this is hidden? Or, just love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good point. And I would say that we talk about it internally as well. I mean, there is a fine line between, as soon as something's published, right? A lot of vendors publish their research, and we've noticed that as soon as somebody comes out and a marketing team publishes this great piece of research, we can see the threat actor move, right?
Mm,
And then you lose visibility of the threat actor, and then you lose the ability to then defend against the threat because they go pop up infrastructure in another place, and it may take you a while to find it again. And I actually had a conversation with 2008, this is a long time ago, with Ryan at Oracle now. He was at Air Force OSI, and he was talking about how they would go out and get on, some mom and pop shop would get popped and compromised and ultimately used to exfiltrate data to an APT group.
mm,
And I asked him the question at the time. I said, "Well, what about mom and pop, right? Who's going to tell them?" I was a DHS. I wanted to save the world, and what about them? And he said, "Yeah, but he said we take that down, and next thing you know, we lose visibility. We don't know which U.S. corporation, which financial institution, which healthcare company the data is now getting stolen from, and
mm,
thousands of users are affected. And frankly, mom and pop, they weren't the targets in the first place." They were just a cog in the wheel, right? And so think about that mental model a little bit. We do need to be careful what we share, just because what we publish, and we need to be responsible. But to your point, Tom, we've got to create environments to where the threat intel teams, the teams that are able to do something about it, can come together, collaborate, and share. And
mm,
so that's a major focus for Team Cymru. It's why we have our underground economy event with 600 different folks in Strasbourg, France every September. We have Rise events. We host Rise X events. Is we want to bring folks, especially regionally, together and to talk
mm,
about the threats that are impacting Australia. We'll have a Rise in Tokyo later this year. We're going to have one in Kuala Lumpur later this year, and we found that some of the best conversations and actual collaboration happens when you get folks in the same room. It's not about Team
mm,
Cymru per se. It's about allowing organizations and law enforcement, bringing in law enforcement. We've been born out of this world of bringing law enforcement and CTI together so that we can bring folks like Mark in who may not
mm,
have the resources or money to pay for all the tools, but bring him into the presentations and see a certain threat actor that is impacting Canada or things that he's assigned to protect, and then let's work together to do some sort, to mitigate it,
mm,
to at least disrupt. We talked a lot. The gentleman at Google, Pratik, talked a bit about disruption, right? What can we do to disrupt and potentially protect a lot of those folks that may be impacted by that at the end of the day down the line? And so I think that's where you're right. There's a fine line, but I think there's a way that responsibly we can get together with the teams in the world at the product security companies that we're really good friends with the folks, Vince over at Stripe. How can we come together with the folks in the right industry to help mitigate, disrupt fraud, and solve the problem, hopefully at a scale that will actually have an impact?
mm. Yeah, that's good, and I think it's good too. We should call out, Tom, that the guys at Team Cymru are paying for us to go to France and to Tokyo and all that sort of stuff as well. So big shout out
Yeah,
to the guys. Thanks, Richard. Just
yeah. Jump
Yeah,
into the ice
watching
water.
us
I
back.
saw those
Yeah,
photos.
yeah, fantastic. But that was a really good event. I think it's exactly that, right? When you do have that proper talk where you say, look,
Relationship based,
we're
yeah.
going to do, yeah, we're relationship based here, but also it is a proper Chatham House rules. Like we're going to actually talk
Mm.
about some stuff here that stays in the room, but just that cross pollination of ideas and saying, oh yeah, we saw this as well, and even just in that room and from conversations that we had at dinner afterwards, some of the stuff shared there, I think it really makes it's a great community. It's a very tight knit community. But you do have to be very careful about what you do say and what goes where. It's a skill that I think we do have in the cyber industry, but it's that balancing act of actually, and the government has that issue with it as well, getting all those feeds in and going, well, if I'm a big corporate in a country like Australia, and we've got big banks here and all that sort of stuff, how much do we tell government? How much do we not? And then how much does that get fed through the ecosystem? The CISAC were there the other day as well. They're doing a lot of stuff around health and other stuff as well. But it's a lot of these things that have happened, whether it be Qantas and other things, where it's like, if we could be more connected and more open in the right circles, we would help prevent a whole lot of stuff. And actually, by sharing really quickly, we can actually help save other people as well. And this is where I think what you guys do is really key, because it is sharing that sort of information, and the broad spectrum and feed that you have actually really makes it so it can actually really help a lot of people, not just here, obviously around the world. And yeah, I thought the way the event was run and the stuff that was shared was awesome. I think the presentations, everything that we saw that day, just from Tom and I, thank you for that, because and we obviously invited a lot of people along, but anyone I spoke to afterwards were really saying, wow, that was a great event. It just, the time went so quickly too. Sometimes you sit at events and you're checking your phone or whatever, but there was every session there was like, that's gold. There's a real nugget there, or there's something you can take away, and actually you're learning the whole time. So yeah, thanks to you and the team for bringing that out here, because we really appreciate it. Got a lot of good information out of it, and the people that actually did attend were raving about it afterwards. And I think everyone loved the coins as well. These coins
Yeah.
seem to get a lot of love as well. So it was a great event, mate, and well done to the team and to yourself in particular.
Thank you.
I've got a last question, and this is very much just asking for an opinion about this. But I went to an event with a very senior person in cyber and home affairs, and essentially what they said is, in Australia the market has failed, and so that's why there's new legislation out there. When we were speaking to Casey Ellis, founder of BugCrowd over in the States, and we kind of dived into AI, he said, essentially the current political environment over there, it's like they've taken the airbags, the brakes, the speedometers out of the car. And so everyone's just going at full speed now. So, do you think the market's kind of failed? And do you think we're kind of in a helter-skelter kind of drive to more chaos, or that the reality is that capitalism is going to kind of keep chugging on as it always does, with the cyber threats, and we'll just be whack-a-moling for the near future?
That's a great philosophical question. Having spent a lot of time at Coke, I was influenced pretty heavily by Charles and free market principles and free market societies, and what makes free societies work best. And, anytime you have central planning, typically you look at central planning in places like China and others, and typically the outcomes aren't any better. And I'll tell you, someone was going to mention it a little bit ago, when I was at home, US CERT, it was a difficult place to serve. We often were criticized because we really, weren't having, as much as we tried, we found it difficult to impact, anybody out in private sector. Right. And so Richard's got a great saying. He says, "Will, nobody's coming to save us." And I think that's the mantra that we've all got to have, is that if we're waiting for the government to come fix it and come roll out some plan that's going to save us all, we're probably in trouble. And so the reality is, when it comes to solving these problems, we as individuals at these organizations, with our influence, the ability to articulate, a vision and a reason and an impact, we likely are in the best place to save ourselves, our organizations. I think back to, not throwing shade at anybody, but you think back to the Home Depot breach, which was 15 years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, what's the impact? I mean, yeah, so hundreds and thousands of folks had their data compromised, right? Or the OMB breach. Well, what's the impact? Who quit buying a Home Depot? Home Depot, yeah, they had to pay out some sort of monitoring, and I'm not attacking Home Depot, because how many folks have been in that boat since then. But what's the real impact to that business, right? Maybe there's a temporary stock glitch, right? But somebody made a lot of money during that too. So, when we think about what the real impact, until there's an impact, right? And I will say, when you look at the financial industry versus manufacturing or construction, obviously financial industry is way ahead in terms of maturity because they're regulated. So I do think regulation is important. Obviously, we can't make it so cumbersome that you can't be profitable in that line of business. I think, you see some of the DORA regulation coming out of EU. I think those are critical for maturing industries that need to do it. And that also puts the onus on the business to meet that regulation, meet that regulatory requirement. And it forces them to invest, maybe where they wouldn't choose to invest otherwise. We were talking, I think, at breakfast this morning about the medical industry. And, if I've got $100,000, if I've got any budget whatsoever, do I put it towards more beds in my hospital and save more lives, or do I invest in cybersecurity? Right. And so it's a difficult trade.
They go the beds.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I know I had this, and I've mentioned this before, but this financial year just gone, the last one, there was a hospital down here, public hospital in Victoria, where it was, need $100K to spend on cybersecurity, but that's going to close down, X amount of beds or a ward, and it's like, well, we can't do that. So the advice was go back through your stack and see if you can find any stuff that you can remove, and then make that room to go and make that purchase. But you cannot add another 100K on. You're going to have to go back through your budget and go through line items and actually try and cross some stuff out that you don't need. They did actually do it, and I think they did save 70 or 80 grand just from that EDR solution that doubled or tripled over on different things and other stuff that they'd actually gone. So it wasn't a bad exercise to do, but you're exactly right. That where that choice is and where you're making that choice, where you're spending your money is a massive thing. And this is something that, we are getting less budget, but we're asked to do more with less, and this is the challenge in cyber at the moment is that, teams are shrinking, budgets are shrinking, but we're asked to protect more things, and that's a big challenge. And one that we don't have the answer for, but you guys are having a good crack at trying to help fix it. So we appreciate that, and thanks for coming on, mate. It's been a good talk, and we'll continue, I'm sure, our conversations and our partnerships into the future. But really appreciate you being on today.
Yeah. My pleasure.
Big shout out to Richard Dufty as well, and thank you, Will, for joining us. Marcel, I spent a lot of time in dinner talking about AI, both great and kind of horrifying solutions. So, listeners, if you can get along to a Rise or a RiseX event, I strongly suggest you do that. And or in all things cyber, it's relationships that are key. Jump on, connect with these guys on LinkedIn, check out the website, and see where you might be able to get involved. And thank you, Will, for joining us. Thank you, as always, Jason, as my co-host.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thank you as well for creating the forum and having the communication, having the chat. I mean, I think it's critical that we get the message out. So appreciate everything you guys are doing as well.
Thanks, man.